so come along to that as well. And the other thing I'd like to mention is that the Quindalup cruise registration is now live, so please sign up for that if you're interested in going. That's all from me. I'll hand over to the interesting guys to take us through the rigging. Thanks very much.
Thanks everyone for attending on a blustery cold summer night. And a special mention to Steve Parko for approaching us to begin with. So I don't think there's been a rigging talk for a little while here, so hopefully everyone takes away at least one point. Some of you may recognise myself and Christian. We've been working up and down these docks for more than a few years, but Rigging WA has actually only been around for 5 months now, which was basically the rigging team of Boating Hardware. When Boating Hardware closed down, we fired up in the same location, doing the same sort of stuff we were doing before. So for many of you, what myself and Christian do hasn't really changed, just different name. So we're privileged enough to sail on a bunch of different boats. We definitely haven't done as many miles as a lot of you guys out there, but between dinghies, keelboats, the odd Sydney to Hobart, Christian just completed a very cold, very long Sydney to Gold Coast race on Enterprise. So hopefully some of those experiences we can pass on and bring some new ideas to your boats and to rigging. So basically tonight we'll cover just a rough intro into MARS rigging itself, what we do as yacht riggers, what we're looking for in inspections, why, and the second part of the talk will be a little bit more catered to the guys that are thinking of Exmouth race, some questions that we get approached in when we're on board, things to do with reefing, chafing on ropes that you get on the longer trips, and a little bit about ropes themselves. When it comes to maintenance, we're trying for prevention. Hopefully it can prevent a major catastrophe. It might only ruin your race, but a bit of maintenance can also save your mast potentially. Quick blast over the two different sorts of masts out there really. Got the carbon fibre masts. They are becoming a little bit more available, therefore the price is coming down slowly. Main benefit is weight saving. So if you can picture 100 kilos saving up at your mast, to get the same sort of riding moment on your boat, you could be potentially saving 500 kilos in your keel, which makes quite a big difference to the performance of your boat. They are also stiffer, and with racing yachts, it's all about stiffness. We're getting super stiff, North sails, 3DI sails. Now a lot of other brands are doing it as well. So the quicker a boat can respond to the gust, the faster it goes. How they achieve this is when they build the mast sections, they can put extra material where they need it. So at the high load areas, but on the low load areas, they can be really thin, really lightweight. While when you've got an aluminium mast, you start with just a tube. It's the same thickness at the bottom as it is at the top. So you have to cater for the highest load. So you've got some areas on your mast which are way over catered with wall thickness, but you've got to have enough material there at the high load points, like where your forestay attaches. One of the negatives with carbon masts is they do need some sort of protection. They do need some sort of paint. So it's either a clear coat, which unfortunately in WA sun sometimes only lasts about 5 years, or you do the white or black gloss, which you might get sort of 7 to 10 years out of. Doesn't matter whether you go aluminium or carbon, it's still very difficult to get hold of. Doesn't make it easy being in WA either. They're a very long section to transport, and transport costs and wait time is pretty big. aluminium masks, easier to get a hold of, and they do allow, it's a lot easier to maintain them and to modify them, repair them, as they're, like I said, a little bit more over-engineered than a lot of the carbon masks. We will stop for questions about halfway through. We'll just see how we're going for time. So focusing on the mask sections themselves, not just the rigging just yet. Corrosion, as we know in the marine world, is a nightmare. Carbon fibre is actually a lot worse than the stainless aluminium reaction. So carbon causes stainless to corrode a lot faster, and carbon versus aluminium, unprotected, the aluminium eats out in a couple of years. It's quite amazing to see. So these two guys are our friends. This one's been around forever. We've probably all been covered in it before. It's not very nice product. I think it's carcinogenic, but it does a great job. And this one here, Tefgel, as the name suggests, it is a gel, and you can put a screw into a carbon or stainless steel aluminium mask, and in 3 years' time, wind it out and it comes out a drain. So using these products, wherever you're putting stainless into aluminium or stainless into carbon will definitely save you some big headaches in the future. You can see this aluminium masks in the stages of assembly. So that's all the stainless fittings have all been painted with Duralat, ready to go back together to hopefully last as long as possible. Standing rigging. 90%, 98% of the boats here are all stainless steel wire. The two main forms of stainless steel wire is the 1x19, which is probably about 70% of those boats, and then there's diform wire, which is a more compact strand, and you can basically grab a meter of 10 mil wire of 1x19 or a meter of diform wire. Diform will weigh more because it's actually got more metal in that 1 meter. So what that means is you've got roughly about 25% greater strength, but also less stretch. And it sometimes means you can get away with where the mask designer might say, oh look, 10 mil wire 1x19 is a bit light on, we should go to 12 mil. It's a big jump in weight, it's a big jump in cost. You can sometimes go to jump from 1x19 to diform, get the greater strength, but not necessarily the greater big jump in weight or big jump in fitting size. So it's more of a race yacht setting or a feature, but you do find it where they're going for a higher brake load without having to necessarily jump up a big size in fittings. 7x19, we don't really see it too much. It's your very flexible wire. You used to find a lot on the trailer boat winches, which are now being replaced by Dyneema. Rod rigging. There's a few guys out here in the audience with your rod rigging. Nitronic 50, its technical name, which is a higher grade, higher tensile version of stainless steel. Big benefits of rod rigging is because it's solid, so really high brake loads, so you can now go a smaller diameter, so less windage, but also because it's a basically unidirectional strand as opposed to a weave like wire, it's again less stretch, which is performance. It does have some other benefits, like it is a little bit less susceptible to corrosion. Unfortunately, insurance companies don't necessarily believe so, and they put it all in the same category, but you'll find rod rigging on bigger cruising boats and smaller race yachts where you're going for size of fittings and windage and stretch, your main features of rod. I'll show you a few more photos of rod coming up. exotic fibres are a little bit less common. The Dyneema or Dux low stretch rope we do see on backstays. The main benefit of the exotic material is weight. It all comes down to weight. Like I said, if you can save weight aloft, the boat has better riding moment, you can carry more power, you can go faster. And even for cruising boats, less weight aloft improves the motion of the boat as well. Less pitching, less rolling. Only problem is it's bloody expensive. So the carbon rigging of a boat like Indian, which is now left the state, you could carry pretty much the whole of Indian's rigging on your shoulder. It would probably be 40 kilos. The equivalent in rod or wire would be 200 kilos. So big difference, probably at triple the price. So key feature for everyone, lifespan of wire rigging. How long is it going to last? So there's probably two main factors that affect your wire rigging, rod as well. Corrosion. It is stainless steel, but the wire strands still allow water to penetrate inside those strands. That water also creeps down inside the fittings. So whether you're sitting at home or whether you're out on the mooring at Rottnest, water and salty air is still attacking those fittings. So unfortunately, whether you use your boat or not, use your boat a lot or a little, it's still corroding away. The problem with that is it's difficult to see because it's often happening internally. That photo on the far side, on the outside, looks like quite nice wire. Inside, badly corroded. Inside the fittings is even harder to inspect. There's not really a test for it, so it's difficult to quantify. How much do you have 50% life left in your wire? Do you have 100%? So that's a big problem that we face with the rigging wire. Other factor, which is a little bit more to do with the use of the boat, is metal fatigue. When you're sailing along, the movement of the stays, it doesn't last forever. Bending back and forth. A few things that you can do to prevent that is making sure that the stays aren't working harder than they should. So are they over-tensioned or under-tensioned where they're actually pumping back and forth, moving harder than they should actually move? The other one, most boats, they use the appropriate fittings, toggles, eyes, that allows for moving the fitting. We don't want it hinging at the terminations. It can differ a little bit on the boat itself. So catamarans, for example, they generally have less tension. They don't need as much tension to hold their mast up because they're a wider base. Also, if you wind your turnbuckles with big shifters, you could keep winding, and then your cupboards won't open down below. So you're actually just stuck bending your boat. So they carry less tension, and they might not go upwind as well, and their forestays might sag a bit more, which is, they reach along really well, go downwind really well, but it does mean that their forestay and their side stays are moving more than a monohull. Or for a catamaran, the diamonds that lock the mast in place, they barely move. They're under a lot of tension. They're locking the mast in, while the side stays and the forestay are moving around a lot while you're sailing. So when we do find issues on the catamaran mast, it's quite often on the forestay where the wires terminate into the swage, particularly at the bottom end around the furlers, just because it's working harder than the other wires on board the boat. So those two factors bring us to the 10-year rule, which some of you may have heard about. This is brought in by the insurance companies. The main players, your Pantaenius, your Nautilus, your Club Marine, they don't necessarily document it that well, but the rough rule of thumb is they want to see you replace your rigging in 10 years. Not a perfect rule. I've done inspections on boat with 15-year-old rigging, and the rigging looks perfect. I can't find a single thing wrong with it. I've done inspections on rigging that's 7 years old, it's corroded, there's broken strands. So there's a lot of factors, but the insurance companies, they have to come up with a number, and companies like Pantanius, so global companies with a huge amount of data, they've worked out roughly 10 years is the time, and they're about right. We do start seeing issues around the 9-10 year rule. So to keep the insurance companies happy, if that's possible, rule number 1, don't listen to me when it comes to insurance, make sure you read the fine print. What hoops does your insurance company want you to jump through? What I advise you to do and what satisfies the criteria of the insurance company are two very different things. So please take that into account. In most cases, we think what they recommend is a bare minimum. So for some boats, you buy a brand new boat, the insurance company doesn't want to know you for 5 years, and they'll say, we want a rig inspection. At 7 years, they'll knock on the door again. Yeah, we want another one. And at 10 years, if they follow their records, they'll call you up and say, you're due for new rigging. Some don't. Sometimes they leave it up to you. Some of them require upmast inspections, which we'll go through in a little bit with things like rod rigging. They're not really worth much, the piece of paper that you write on, because they only tell you about 20% of the story. So it's a little bit doing the bare minimum to keep the insurance company happy is one option, but there's definitely a lot more you can do to try and guarantee your mast stays up in the air and you don't get any breakages. Some of the other requests from the insurance companies, if you do have rod rigging, is non-destructive testing, which is a dive penetrant test, which does require the mast to come out. Sufficient cover. When it comes to $50,000 boat, some insurance companies say, okay, break that down. So do you put $40,000 into the hull, keel, engine, and 10 grand into the mast and sails? So $40,000 is a lot of money to repair a boat, but if a mast breaks, often you can't repair it quite often. The second-hand mast market almost doesn't exist, so you're left going down the path of a new mast. So you want to make sure you've got your coverage where you can actually put the money in the right place, and you're not left with a massive imbalance from the payout versus the cost of a new mast. Repairing a collision is a tenth of the price of replacing a mast, or sails, for example, which are usually not salvageable from a mast falling over. So make sure that the cover take into account that it's a potential write-off, and for a lot of insurance companies, it's a percentage of what the value as well. So, and also if you're racing, there's another deduction on the percentage they pay out. So doing a lot of research into the insurance is important. They don't necessarily always know what they're talking about, but unfortunately we've got to sort of follow the rules. Rig inspections. One of those is me. You guys can take which one. Okay, so upmast inspections, plus deck hardware of course. Carry out your own inspections. Try to get confident going up the mast. If you guys end up sailing up to Exmouth, you've just completed 600 miles. You should really be going up the mast after that, making sure, do we get any wear and tear? Has something come loose? The riggers may not be there to have a look, or if you decide to go cruising after or Bali race and end up in Indonesia, trying to get confident going up the mast yourself, taking photos. Don't drop your phone, I've done it, it's expensive. But photos are a great reference. You go, that rope's chafing a bit, take a photo. Go to Rottnest all summer, come back, go up your mast, it's badly worn. Okay, it's getting worse, we need to do something about it, prevent it. The other one is you can always send the photos to riggers, get a second opinion. Is this crack actually a major, or is this staining a problem? is this pulley about to break? It gives you a reference point that you can go back to. But we're not always available, and not necessarily with the boat. So try to get in the habit of going up yourself, the same person preferably, and get a bit of a reference point. Depending on the use of the boat, Crush, for example, TP52, they will send up, most likely the bowman, after every race, looking for any problems with screws coming loose because they're pushing the boat really hard, and they're definitely not taking their foot off. So they want to check it after every race. Obviously, if you're going to and from Roto, take that into account. But one of the first things Bill did when he got back, booked in a rig inspection. What are we looking at? What damage is there? What wear and tear? Okay, so if you come down to the yacht club and you see one of us up a mast, sometimes we're taking photos of the view. Other times we're taking photos of broken strands. This one up on the top is probably the most common area that we look for broken wire is at the fittings. That's a combination of the hinging, hard point versus soft wire, but also the corrosion factor inside the fittings themselves, inside the swage fittings. So you might find that it's not as obvious as this one here, where there's actually a visibly broken strand. What you're looking for is perfectly uniform strands, and then one of them's just got a little bump on it. Doesn't feel quite even. And with a little even fingernail, a little screwdriver, you'll go around and you might notice that one or two strands move more than others. That means it's broken, but it's probably broken about 5 mil inside. We're not looking for that unraveled wire that you can spot from 2 or 3 boats down. It's a tiny little change in the uniform wire. We spotted one on, it was Moo, the ex-yacht, the interstate, and we're doing a rig inspection. We found one strand that was moving, and I felt like it might have been 2. So called the guys, recommended replacing it. When we got it back at the shop for a bit of our own amusement, we cut the wire right at the strand, and 4 other tiny little pieces of metal fell out, which were 4 or 5 other strands. So he had actually broken, it was about 6 or 7 strands all up. And once one goes, the guys next to it, the loading goes through the roof. So as soon as you see one strand gone, you've got to replace that wire. It's definitely not going to last very long. Back to the corrosion, aluminium versus stainless. We've got some great photos coming up of how bad that can get and how difficult it is to gauge from an external view, just from looking on the outside, going, oh, it doesn't look too good. How bad actually is it? When you're up there looking for electrical damage, a lot of it's just UV. So we put different cable protectors, cable ties. It's plastic. It definitely won't last forever. In WA sun, we're talking 18 months, and then you have to probably replace that. And we do get the birds, which do a great job on that expensive wing gear. Excessive movement at spreaders. Where your spreaders join at the mast is a really high load area. They're working really hard, particularly on swept-back spreader boats. So we want to see if it's moving at all, because that movement, as you launch over waves, that movement is only going to get worse. It's under a lot of strain. So and often it's quite hidden inside what's happening with your spreader bars or your connections. So if you do get movement there, we want to try and get onto it pretty quickly, because it definitely won't improve. And it's something that we see off Fremantle, because we've got some pretty rough conditions out there. If you bash down to Bunbury, you're launching off some pretty big waves, and that rig is constantly working hard, and your spreaders are trying really hard to lock that in. So it's a combination of how the mast was built, whether it was built for Perth conditions, or the tension on the mast, or if you've got a boat with running backstays or check stays, hook them up stop that pumping, or if you've got an interstate, things like that can make a huge difference to the spread of movement. Rope damage, UV chafe, or chafe or UV damage, really common. Again, we sort of forget about what's happening up there, but some of those, you know, if you've got a jib on a furler, we pull that jib up, we forget about it. It's got a nice UV cover on it, it's all good, forget about it. But we'd still have about a foot of halyard exposed to the sun at a really high wear point, or high load point, that's just sitting there in the sun, day in, day out. And rope,